Hello and welcome to the Low Carb Conversations podcast. I am your host, Holly Jean, and I am joined today with my co host, Leah. Hi, Leah.
Hi, Holly. Hi, everyone.
And we have our guest today is Stephanie Reiter. She is a fellow FNTP, just like Leah and I, and she's also a special education teacher. So since we are heading into a new school year, we thought this was the perfect time to bring her on. Hello, Stephanie.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the show. So you and I met when I was in Boise studying for my NTA class, and you were a mentor, right? A course mentor at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is how we met. And yeah, like I said, we're entering a new school year. I know Leah and I both have kids about to enter school, and everyone's in the hustle and bustle of back to schoolness. So this is the perfect time to bring you on. But why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your journey and how you went from being a teacher to then doing NTA, and just tell us your life story.
Yeah, so I've been in education since 2008, so public school education in the United States. I started in California, then taught in Hawaii, and now I'm in the state of Idaho in Boise. And through my own health struggles, I kind of started studying nutrition and realized that there's a lot of stuff that parents don't know. Kids are eating garbage in school, and there's a lot of stuff that's affecting their learning. So we call it like junk learning when they're like doped up on sugar. And I saw a need to bring more education into the classroom for kids and parents. And so I actually got certified as a holistic health coach through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition probably about a decade ago. And then I ended up going through the nutritional therapy practitioner program a couple years later. Which is where I met Holly. And yeah, here I am. I started my business, Real Food Education, probably about 4 years ago. And now I kind of work with kids with ADHD, mild autism, and then families who just want to kind of get healthier.
So were you always working with those demographics, or you were just always in education? And then once you started learning more about nutrition, you were drawn more to that demographic?
Yeah, so when I started teaching special education, which was about 2012, there was a little boy who his mom was like, we're going to take him off gluten, we're going to take him off dairy and food dye and all of that. And like the way his behavior changed with just dietary modifications really intrigued me. And I was going through my own health struggles at the time. And so I did some modifications as well, and I saw really good results. And I'm like, there's something to this, and people need to know what's going on.
Yeah, that was actually a little bit similar to how I came into doing NTA. I was working with a group also in California, the Holistic Moms Network, and there I was just trying to connect with other moms who are more into like gentle parenting and extended breastfeeding. Like nutrition wasn't really on my radar yet, but more and more moms were joining the group and coming in with similar stories of like having children who are autistic or the severe health problems, but then finding that I actually worked with a woman through Holistic Moms who completely recovered her twin daughters from autism just by changing their diet and doing like you said, removing the gluten and the casein. And I think they did the body ecology protocols, but just like totally healing the gut and learning about the gut brain connection. And I mean, that just opened my eyes to be like, wow, because it wasn't just one or two people. It was like pretty much every other mother that I met was recovering their children from either autism or other like neurological or behavioral issues, or even just severe health problems strictly with nutrition. That was amazing.
What's funny is like they'll go to their doctors and the doctors will say like, oh, food doesn't really have anything to do with it. And then moms try it and they realize that it actually does.
Yeah, sometimes that anecdotal evidence really it speaks for itself. I mean, I was just listening to a podcast earlier this week, like kind of preparing for this episode here. And there was a woman on who's at some big university or some kind of like big like autism education type of thing. And here she's on this podcast talking about how removing gluten and casein or any kind of like additives doesn't really have an effect, and there aren't any studies. So I was like, what do you mean there aren't any studies? I couldn't even believe it. Yeah. So, but it just blew my mind that here we are, like, this is information that doctors and professionals are still out there telling people that your nutrition doesn't matter and that diet doesn't matter. Just blowing my mind. Okay, so we want to cover kind of a few things today. We did select some articles, and I was thinking we could start talking about like how nutrition was, how it's kind of evolved, where we are now, and maybe finishing off with leaving some hope of some hope for the future of where things are going. But I'm actually really curious, like, so when you're working with your students and maybe your colleagues, like, you find that people are really receptive to the information you have to share, or like, are you met with some resistance from either of those groups?
I feel like the more I do this, the less resistance I get. So now people are a little bit more receptive. When I first started and it wasn't as known, because like gluten-free was like you couldn't find a bunch of gluten-free things in the stores, and now you can. And so I think there's more awareness around it, and I think there's more moms that have stories to share, and so now people are more open to it.
Yeah.
As far as like my colleagues go, well, so now I work in a virtual school, so I don't have an actual classroom. But when I was working in a brick and mortar school, I mean, you would see kids bring in treats all the time and food dye and sugar and all that. And I think some people were kind of like, well, if we give kids that, they don't really behave as well, or they're just not learning to their capacity if they're eating all this junk. And I think some people were really aware of that. And then there were people who were like, let kids be kids, let them eat the junk. That's what I did when I was a kid. But the crops now are a little different, and the spray on them, we'll probably get into that later, but I think it's a little bit different, but I think there is more awareness around it now.
Yeah, I agree. All right, we have 4 articles today, so I want to get diving into those. And Leah has our first one. Go ahead, Leah.
All right, well, we're going to go way, way back now, like 3,000 to 5,000 years. And we found this really interesting article. It's called "The Real Paleo Diet: Scientists Debunk Ancient Food Myths." And it's a really, really long article, so we'll link it up in the show notes so that people can have a read. It's very interesting. But some of the points that drawn from it are, it's an article about discovery scientists have made from children's graves thousands of years ago, giving an indication of what they were eating. And they were finding lipids in baby bottles, suggesting that 3,000 years ago, mothers were weaning their children with animal milk. And the bottles that they were using were actually like in these funny little kind of look like little animal kind of shape. So it was almost like they were entertaining the children with it, and the children were drinking out almost like the sippy cups that we give our kids today with the funny little things on them. And that was like 3,000 years ago. So that was a really interesting discovery. And then in other areas, scientists found evidence of I think it was like around the necks, they found like cheese, that a cheese necklace, which was kind of interesting. But they started detecting the microbes in them, and they found that they found kefir, which is like a fermented milk kind of drink, or that we know about now. And that was like, I think 5,000 years ago or something like that. So they were finding like links to things that have been brought through into like everyday times now that were dating back that far. So they started doing all these tests and all these like reenactments of all these different kinds of things. But right at the end of the article, there was 2 paragraphs that I just want to read out that was just absolutely amazing, that I really loved. And this is it. It says, From scouring the traces of meals consumed long ago to reenacting the methods that made them, these scientists are unveiling aspects of the shared human experience that is cooking. For Miller and her colleagues, this profound connection motivated them to continue cooking their bland meals. So they were doing these experiments. And cooking is one of the most unifying things that humans have had across time and space. Food and food practices embody culture, politics, status, identities, upbringings, and more. Though often done without much reflection, food reveals much. It's a daily practice, usually representative of all of the much larger questions about our place in the world. And I just thought that was just so amazing. So firstly, Stephanie, what did you think about some of these points in the article?
Yeah, so I think cooking is such a unifying practice, and a lot of moms like to cook with their kids and eat with their families and stuff. And I think knowing that that practice was going on many years ago is really interesting. In fact, I wish it would be more prevalent today. I don't think people spend enough time cooking their own meals, and I don't think families spend enough time eating together. But yeah, the cheese necklace and the finding the kefir and stuff. That's interesting. I know the paleo diet though goes back like 10,000 years. So this isn't really like true paleo, but it's cool to see that like parents were giving their kids real nutrient dense foods.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that whole cultural aspect is something that we can definitely, I mean, since I guess the beginning of time, like, we've always been in that family unit, and eating is something we need to do to survive. And there was such big rituals and connection about it. Why do you think that, that many families do it, but why do you think that it's starting to lose that kind of connection in today's modern society?
People are just busy. People are overworked. They're buying convenience foods, and a lot of teens are playing sports, and sports are like happening during dinner time. And so there's really not that connection like there used to be.
Yeah, definitely. And when you work with families, do you give them any tips on how they can try and get that connection back together?
It really depends on their schedule. Some families, it's just not doable. Like dad's working all the time, or it's like a single mom or something. But I think there is a benefit to having families eat together. I know there's been studies that show families who eat together, the kids tend to weigh a little bit less and be a little bit healthier, and the parents as well. So there is benefit to, staying with the family unit when you're cooking and eating.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Like I know in our family, we try and have at least one meal together, which is dinner. And at the moment I'm in lockdown, so we're having every meal together. And we make a point of sitting at the table together and having that time, because we do lead such busy lives. So that's our little time that we do it. But I remember back to my family when I was growing up, and we didn't actually really have much of a dining table, and we had a coffee table in front of the TV, and dad would sit at one end and eat his dinner, and my brother and I would sit on the floor and eat our dinner, which we used to think was like so weird because nobody else used to do that. But now we know from studying NTA that eating on the floor probably isn't too bad, but for our digestion. But even though we weren't sitting at a proper table, that was the one time where we were together, even though we might have been watching TV, or we were still together and still talking about the day's events. So even though it doesn't seem like the conventional way of doing it, we were still finding that time to connect together while we were eating. And I think that's the most important thing out of all of this. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. And my family was the opposite. We had the dining table and we sat together, and dinner was the only meal we ate together, because that was the only one that kind of fit into our schedule. But yeah, we had that. And I mean, as a teen, I was like, can we just turn the TV on and like make these people be quiet? Like, I didn't want to talk to my parents because that's, teenagers. But I mean, now looking back at it, I do value that time I had. And I think that we are losing that as a culture. Yeah, I think there's a lot of like convenience foods, and people will bring home like a bucket of chicken or whatever. And I mean, maybe they'll sit around in front of the TV, but they won't really talk.
Yeah. And I think it's that, that connection of winding down from the day, or talking about the day, and then mindfully eating that food so we know that we're eating. So it doesn't, I mean, ideally we want to be eating real food, right? But if it is a bucket of chicken and they're still eating mindfully and talking with one another, there's still that family connection happening there, rather than that disconnect between it, because we do have to eat, like, basically. So why not make it that time? What about you, Holly? What are you going to say?
Yeah, no, I was just actually going to bring up that same point, Leah. It's like, maybe if you just need to start somewhere, maybe not even worrying about what it is you're eating. If the fast food, if the convenient foods or whatever it is what works with your timing right now in the season of life that you're in, but you can still prioritize sitting down and eating together as a family. Just that in itself has nutritional benefits, because you're going to be sitting down, you're going to be having conversation that's going to lower your stress. You guys can slow down a little bit, be a little more mindful and present. And that itself can have its own health benefits aside from what it is you're actually eating. So if you just need to start somewhere, starting with that, because not only will it have those healthful benefits, for the way you're eating, but just that connection and those relationships have been proven to carry on and be beneficial years down the line, even if it is only a couple times a week.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think such a interesting article, and just love those little bits at the end there. But to keep moving on, because we've got so many articles to get through today, the next article, Holly, I found really amazing. We don't actually do school lunches like that in Australia. We pack our own lunch and take them. We don't have a school, like a setup. So I feel like I'm kind of lucky in some ways, because I don't have to deal with that. But then, also we're having to deal with, all what to pack into the lunch boxes and what constitutes a healthy one. But Holly, I'll let you read this article.
Yeah, I will say now that we are in Oklahoma now, and I am going to be sending my children to school, I'm not going to be homeschooling anymore. I have so much stress and anxiety around having to pack a lunch every single day, because that is probably one of the hardest parts about having children in school, is trying to think of what to put in their lunch that they're going to eat. That's going to either stay warm or stay cold. It's stressful. And I just picture all those cute bento boxes on the Pinterest boards, and I'm not that mom. So. But anyways, I love this article, and actually it will be linked up in the show notes. But for those of you listening, I encourage you to look at this article, because it's actually written like a graphic novel. And so it was really kind of fun to read and follow. But the title of it is Why School Lunches Feel Like They Are Frozen in Time. And it's the fascinating history behind why students today are still eating square pizzas, crinkle fries, and cartons of milk. And this is pretty relatable, because I think no matter how old you are, school lunches are not much different from when my parents were a kid to what they are now when my kids are in school. The school lunch program, it started at the turn of the 20th century, when education became compulsory. And it's then like changed through the Great Depression and World War II, and the government getting involved in how we're educating the children, how we're feeding our children. And then Congress passed the National School Lunch Act in 1946. And that is what brought in the low cost or free lunches for qualified students. And then that expanded into the Child Nutrition Act of 1966, which then added in breakfast to be included in those meals provided at school. And then from there, it's just kind of changed and been determined based on what industries had surpluses, what the budget looked like for the program. And then schools started contracting with fast food companies and getting vending machines. And so it's just really kind of changed. And then the Obama administration in 2010, they passed the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. And there were complaints all across the board about that, even though the intentions of that program were good. Lobbyists complained because then whatever product they're pushing are getting demonized or cut out of the program. And then students weren't happy because they didn't like the healthier food options. So that was creating a lot of food waste. So this article, it has a lot in it, and I definitely recommend people go and look at it. But Stephanie, as an educator and someone working in schools, how have you seen school lunches change over the years? And how do you think the school lunch program is going or not going? Like, I'm just so curious to hear your thoughts about this article and what you see like working in this.
I haven't really seen them change. So I actually, I've been on lunch duty before, and I've seen the school lunches, and they look exactly the same as when I was a kid. And, you know, I was in grade school like 30 to 40 years ago, and square pizza was a thing, and it's still a thing. And it's now considered a whole grain and a vegetable, which is ridiculous to me, but I think it was the same thing in the 80s when I was growing up. My thing with what I see kids do is, like, if there's a sweet or like a dessert on the plate, they're gonna go for that first. And so, well, I've done school lunch duty in 3 states, and they're all pretty much the same. So like the little icy cup with the food dye, it's just like ice and corn syrup and food dye. It's kind of like a little snow cone. That's usually what gets eaten first, and then the vegetables tend to be left, like the kids don't touch them. And the reason is it's like corn and brownish green beans. And I mean, the intention is good of like putting salad bars in the schools, and that's one of the things that the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act did in the early 2000s. But kids don't touch that, and the ones who do, they get teased by their friends, like, oh, you took a vegetable, you're gonna eat lettuce, are you a rabbit?
No, my son, I remember when my son was going to the salad bar at school, before we were homeschooling, they were in school for a little bit, and his vegetables, or what he would take to be considered as vegetables, because they're like, the lunch duty person has to tell you that, make sure that you have something from each food group. But he would eat pickles. And that was his vegetable from the salad bar.
And it counts.
Yeah.
And it could be worse. So
yeah, and like you said, in the 80s, when you were talking about that, it's like that is when they changed the regulations of the pizza to be considered a whole grain and vegetable and a dairy, and that was due to budgetary cuts, and they considered, okay, now ketchup is a vegetable too, because we got to get it in there, and yay, they're getting a vegetable, and it's affordable, and juice boxes became a fruit.
yeah, well, actually, a lot of schools, I don't see juice boxes anymore. I see them in breakfast. So like I'll be on breakfast duty sometimes too, but I see like apple juice and orange juice, but it's not complete. Like, it's concentrate, it's just garbage juice. The thing I don't like is that this article, there's a picture of whole milk, but I've never seen a carton of whole milk available in a school cafeteria.
I noticed that too. Yeah, where it says bring back whole milk, and I was like, I don't remember there ever being whole milk.
Yeah, there's like fat-free is like the main one that they try to give the kids, and there is like a 2% or a 1% option, but there is never a whole milk option. But the majority of the kids will opt for chocolate milk or strawberry milk.
Yeah, which is just corn syrup and food dyes. So you already mentioned food dyes. And so I think this next article is the good one. Like, we can really pull a lot from this. So yes, our school lunch program hasn't changed. It's not amazing. But let's take it a little bit of a step further, because not only is it maybe not the best food or the best program and anything on that kind of a scale, we're talking about national level. Like, it's going to have problems, even if the intentions are good. And then once you get the government involved, then but let's talk about like the actual ingredients in the foods that we're getting, because it is a government program. It does have a budget, and we know in our field that to make food inexpensive, you have to use cheap ingredients. Cheap ingredients produce cheap food. So this article is from Environmental Health News, and it's titled "Food Dyes Linked to Attention and Activity Problems in Children." It says synthetic dyes used as colorants in many common foods and drinks can negatively affect attention and activity in children, according to a comprehensive review of existing evidence that's published this month. Yes, that actually was this month by the California Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment. It's saying food dyes in products such as breakfast cereals, juice, and soft drinks, frozen dairy, desserts, candies, icings were linked to adverse neurobehavioral outcomes in children, including inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and restlessness. Animal studies also revealed effects on activity, memory, and learning. This report is the most rigorous assessment of the behavioral effects of food dyes ever conducted. Stephanie, you've already mentioned junk learning. And you shared the story about the one parent who kind of piqued your interest with changing their child's diet and seeing significant improvement in a short amount of time. So talk to us a little bit more about how you see these dyes and additives playing a role in the education part of our children in school.
Well, I'll start by saying that not every child is affected by food dyes. So like you and I, well, we all know that we're all NTPs. So we know like bioindividuality, right? So, you know, one kid it could be neurotoxic to one student and then another student wouldn't feel the effects. But for a lot of kids who have ADHD or autism, they do feel the effects of this stuff. And I think it just really takes away from their focus in the classroom. And I want there to be like more education around food dyes. The article mentions that like a lot of the stuff that we have in the US is banned everywhere else. And so our students here are getting exposed to all this stuff, but like in Australia, maybe where Leah is, where her kids go to school, they're not being exposed to this, mostly because the parents are sending their kids to school with their own food.
But even the food they're buying in the stores don't have the same ingredients as in the United States.
Although we do have some of them that we wish were banned as well. But there's a, I
think in Europe, they have the tightest regulations. So the European Union bans a lot of stuff that like the US is like, well, you know, we haven't really like seen studies to say it's completely unsafe yet.
And that is one of the things that people don't realize about the FDA is that actually manufacturers of food or anything don't actually have to prove that something is safe before putting it in their products. That's it's called, generally recognized as safe. And so you can put stuff in your products and say, yeah, we think it's safe, but you don't actually have to ever prove that it is.
I mean, down the line, they might see that it's not safe, but the kids are the guinea pigs. They're the ones testing this stuff out. And I've seen, I mean, like I said, that little boy with autism, they took food dye out of his diet and he was, you know, he improved. And one day, like a couple of months down the line, after they had done that, a student brought in like red licorice for his birthday and the kid ate it. And I could just, you know, he had this like glazed over brain fog look on his face. And I think that's, you know, very common. We see that, or like not being able to focus or sit still in a classroom because they are consuming these neurotoxins.
Yeah, I see it in my son, my oldest son, and it's definitely with the red dyes also. And I see it immediately. And, you know, as you mentioned, like, yeah, there is bioindividuality, and maybe most children or a lot of children don't display the effects of it. But I'm curious, like if we were to take them out, how maybe we would see a change then, because just because you're being exposed to something a little bit regularly, that just might be your norm because it's what you have all the time. But it'd be an interesting experiment to take it out and to see if anything changes there. And I think it's important to have conversations like these and to just bring awareness that we do have different standards in the United States as compared to other countries, because we as consumers have so much power over the companies that are making these things. And if we don't know that this is an issue, or that we are being served food that is of lesser quality than in other areas, then we should be able to push back and demand higher standards in our foods.
Well, a lot of people don't know that a lot of parents don't read labels. They'll just, trust the companies and buy something that has food dye in it and feed it to their kids and not think twice about it. And the schools,
Right.
their intentions are good as well. And it's like, let's give these kids something that looks appetizing, that they want to eat, so that we feed them and they're not hungry. And I don't think there's a lot of consideration about what these chemicals could do to some kids. And I often think that like ADHD, maybe it's not really true ADHD. Maybe it's just like chemicals in food or certain food ingredients that are causing symptoms of hyperactivity and inattentiveness.
So how do you approach something like that? Like if you're suspecting that a child's behavior or learning issues or anything like that may have some kind of a dietary cause or source, like how do you approach that with a parent gently? Because I know, like, as moms, like we always we believe that we're doing everything right for our kids. And I know from experience that sometimes bringing things up to people, they feel judged, or it's taken personally as, I'm a bad mom. And so it's like, how do you approach those conversations or suggest looking into dietary stuff in a way that's gentle?
So the thing that I like to have them do is keep a food journal and then kind of evaluate what are they eating and see if I can offer alternatives. Now, the one thing I will say is there is some pushback, because oftentimes the all natural alternatives, they are a lot more expensive. A lot of these like food dyed foods are subsidized and they're cheaper and they're readily available, and you can go into any big box grocery store and find them. And the healthier stuff, you have to kind of go out of your way and you have to spend a little bit more. And a lot of parents just either can't do that, or they just don't see the value in it.
Yeah, it is hard. It's a blog that I used to follow when my kids were younger, is 100 Days of Real Food. And it's a family that takes just 100 days and goes through those growing pains and those learning pains and that transition of getting off of the snack foods and just going to real food. And I think for people listening, if maybe that is an area that you're struggling in, that might be a good inspirational resource to know that, yeah, it might not be totally easy, but I think one of the easiest things for getting away from those snack foods, and instead of having to find healthier, more expensive alternatives of the snack foods, just kind of phase them out altogether. And so that was a resource I like. Do you have other resources that you like to recommend for people for like learning about that kind of stuff, or how to make it easier to transition?
I mean, there's a lot of like natural food blogs, and parents can like buy they can make their own food if they have time. And there's a lot of recipes that I give out. But I like the 100 Days of Real Food. I've seen that too. And it doesn't even have to be 100 days. You can just say, try it for 3 days and see if you notice a difference in your kids. And a lot of times, if the kids are old enough, so like, I feel like if the kids are like, maybe like 8 or older, they do realize like, oh, I feel better when I eat better. When I eat this food that's like dyed bright red, I don't feel good. And, they can notice that eating more natural foods makes them feel better. They're doing better in school. Maybe they do better on a spelling test or a math test. And they're like, okay, mom, like when I eat this real food, I do better in school. So just bringing that awareness to parents and children is really helpful.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. My older son, he's 10, but it probably was around 7, 8-ish where he was able to feel that difference in his body if he were to make different choices. But I think it's getting to that point to where you're eating enough whole foods for enough amount of time. It has to be more than just like 3 days, I think. So maybe if you just try it for 10 days, 2 weeks, and then that'll give the body time to then feel the difference between the foods.
Yeah,
Got
there's
a question.
oh, sorry. Well, I was gonna say there's a concept called crowding out. So you just kind of feed them like, give them carrot sticks instead of a candy bar. And then, they're full of carrot sticks. They don't want the candy because they're not hungry. Or keep them busy, find something else for them to do instead of hang around in the kitchen.
I think that's a good tip. And I was going to suggest something like that too. Like maybe back to school lunches, you can't not get them away from having school lunches, but maybe the meals that you can have at home can be nutrient dense and filling, so that when they come to school, they're not really relying heavily on the foods that they're having there. Do you have any other tips? Like if it's unavoidable to have the school lunch, and I mean, this is an even bigger issue, but surely there's children out there that's probably like their only meal that they're getting.
Yeah, there's quite a handful of kids in America that the school breakfast and lunches are the only meals they eat. And then usually on the last day of the week, they will go to the school's pantry and they'll get to fill up a bag and take it home for their families. And it's just a bunch of junk. But I think going back to the families eating together, I think if the parents were serving nutrient dense meals at dinner time and they were kind of having that conversation about this is a cucumber, there's kids that they don't know what that is. And so like just talking to the kids about the produce, about what they're eating, about how it's making them feel. Just being more mindful about what they're putting in their own bodies and saying like, look, this, if you eat healthy food or if you eat and a lot of kids will turn up their nose at the word healthy. And I was one of those kids, so I totally get it. But if you kind of make it where it's like, this food will help you in the classroom, or this food might make you do better on your test. What kid's not going to respond positive? Well, there are kids, but for the most part, I think kids will respond positively to that. Okay, so if I eat my vegetables and my nutrient dense meat, like then I'll do better in school. Whereas like if I eat this cupcake for dinner, then I'm not going to do so well in school the next day.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I actually saw a study years ago where at the school cafeteria, they started naming the vegetables like funny names. So it was like, cowabunga carrots or something like that, like which gave it a name that kids were like, oh, we might try that. And at the same time I read the article, I was having trouble feeding my son vegetables, and he was, so we were like, that sounds interesting. So he was a big fan of that movie Cars at the time. And so we named like all the vegetables characters from the Cars movie and moved them around his plate. Like, look at this car, it's Lightning McQueen and stuff like that. And he loved it and ate all of the vegetables every single time that we did that. But there comes a point like, when he gets a bit older and he's like, I'm not into that anymore. It's a vegetable. But I think being creative like that, those school cafeterias is a good step as well.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think just to keep the kids engaged in whatever is on their plate.
Yeah, that's right. Because if someone told you, oh, it's healthy, you're going to be like, whatever.
I don't want to eat that. What? No, I want this like chocolate milk. I want like 2 chocolate milks instead of this like mush of green beans on my plate. But
yeah, I definitely try to avoid. Oh, go ahead, Leah.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I have the same problem when I'm teaching yoga to the kids and I'm like, this will be great for when you're older. And they're like, whatever, I'm not thinking about, I'm not going to be old.
Yeah, I try when I'm talking to my kids, like I definitely try to avoid the words like healthy or junk food and stuff, because I don't want to put those kinds of labels on things, but I do talk about like the benefits of things like this is going to help you have energy for your parkour class, or this might actually take away some of your energy for your class or something. So we talk about like building muscles and having brain power and having more energy and running faster, like the things that appeal to them. Like my little one, if I tell him something will help him run faster so he can beat his brother in a race, he's so competitive, he will eat anything.
So cute.
So it's like finding what motivates them. But I like, Stephanie, that you were talking about like bringing more of the education around what the foods are. And like you said, some children are not even exposed to these things. And so that's why I really like this last article too, because I think there is hope. Like maybe we've talked about what the problems are and how the programs aren't perfect, but I really do think that there's a lot of people out there wanting to change things and wanting to change the trajectory of our children's health. And so there are a lot of programs that are popping up, and this is one of them. Go ahead and talk about this, Leanne.
Yeah, so this is the school gardens, how they're enhancing children's nutrition and improve their learning environment. So this one's particularly talking about a program that they've introduced in, I think it's in Syria, and it was with some funding helped by Japan. So it was like a really nice cross-country collaboration, helping kind of bring these gardens into the school where they can learn practical activities and bring resilience into the children. Then they learn something about growing and agricultural practices, and then they can take that back to their homes and do the same kind of thing. So I thought that was a really great thing. And I'm sure there's probably similar programs happening in other countries around and stuff like that. But Stephanie, do you want to talk a little bit about how, I guess, like, going back to that, this is like going right back to the actual growing practice and how that can help children?
Yeah, not every school has a garden here, but I've seen a couple schools where they do have the funding for it. And so they'll grow a garden, and maybe like one grade will get to take care of it because that's part of the curriculum. But I think it's really awesome that kids can see how does your food grow, and like, what does an actual carrot look like? Because for some kids, the cowabunga carrots, they look like those little baby carrots all cooked up and mushed, and they've never seen an actual carrot pulled right out of the ground with the dirt on it and the peel and the greens on top. And so they'll get to see that. And I've seen kids like get excited about beets. I mean, when I was a kid, you couldn't get me to touch those, but if like we grew them in my school garden, I would have loved them.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Like, we took my children to a farm and we were walking around getting a farm tour, and they were growing like kale out of the garden, and like, I can't get my children to eat kale at home, and they were just like ripping it off the plant and chewing on it. And I was like, oh, come on. So I think, yeah, learning that connection of this is how it grows, this is what it really looks like. And then that's, and bringing it forward, I think they can just make that connection. But then even another step here is that they're bringing these practical skills into the classroom as part of the learning in order to help their community as a whole.
Yeah, I've seen kids where they'll take their garden bounty and they'll just go make a soup out of it. And the whole class will get the soup. And, half these kids, they wouldn't eat these vegetables at home, but because they made it as a community, as a group in the classroom while learning valuable things, they're consuming things that they wouldn't normally eat. And nobody's saying this stuff is healthy. They're just saying this is a carrot or this is a tomato.
Yeah. I think it's great. Our school system here in Australia, the state school system, is just starting to introduce a few things. And our local school has a garden initiative that they won some funding for. So they've been putting gardens in, they have chickens. And then the kids do this thing called nature play, which is basically like just all this old objects of like wood and bits of things. And they get their license and they're allowed to go and just basically climb trees and play in the dirt all of the lunch hour while the chickens are roaming around them. And there's all these fruit trees and things growing and stuff like that. And I just thought, like, that's like, I would just absolutely have loved that when I was at school. So I think people are starting to realize that importance and that connection back to nature and growing things and then bringing it all the way forward now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it? Oh, you go, Holly.
Sorry, my dog's shaking over here. No, I was just going to say, like, definitely the school gardens are something that I am seeing more and more of around. But the last public school that we were in California, they didn't have one, but it wasn't because they didn't have the budget for it or they didn't have the resources. It really came down to they didn't have someone to do it. None of the teachers wanted to do it. It takes an interest from either a teacher or even as a parent or someone in the community. If that is something that you'd like to see in your schools, I don't know very many schools that would say, no, please don't help us with a garden program. A lot of times, maybe it is just they need volunteers. They need more resources. They need more help in that department. And if it's not at a school, that's something you can start in your community. If you have the space for it and you have the heart for it, that's something you can do in your own home and just start forming little groups. I will say, like, when we were homeschooling, like the garden tour, the farm and garden tours were probably the most popular field trips we ever did. And just as you said, Leah, yeah, the kids go around and my kids were eating green onions out of the ground. My kids won't touch an onion. They were munching on green onions and picking their own things and excited about shopping at like the little farm stand that they have at these places and taking them home. And so bringing that connection is so important, but we can't be reliant upon the school to do it themselves. Like, I think that is an area where we as community and as parents can step up and offer to help in that department.
Yeah, well, I think this has been a really great chat, and we've covered so many different areas right back from time right through to now. And there's so many great tips that our listeners can share share in and get motivated by. Stephanie, where, I don't know if Holly mentioned at the start, but where can we find you? What's your website called? We'll link that up into the show notes as well.
Yeah, so I am over at www.realfoodeducation.com, and I'm not super active on social media, but you can find me on Instagram at Real Food Education. That's pretty much the only one I use. That's it.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I love that name. It's so clever, the Real Food Education, because it combines everything.
Yeah, that was the idea, is that I want to educate with, like, real food needs to be more in the curriculum of schools, and parents need to be more aware, but yeah.
Oh yeah, that's great. I love that. And you also teach, do you teach Restart classes still at the moment? And
I'm not currently offering one, but probably after the new year, I'll probably offer a session, so I can have up to 10 people sign up. So I'll probably do a January Restart.
Yeah, which is a great program, which really, takes the parents and the whole family through understanding the importance of real food and how it works in the body and things like that. So yeah, people do you have a newsletter or something they can sign up to if they're interested?
Yes, so they can go to my website and sign up for a newsletter that way.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. We've really had a great chat.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
That's the end of today's episode. Our theme music is created by Andrew Bowden, and production services are by Kevin Kennedy Spain of Disc of Light Media. Have a great week, everyone.
Have a great week.